I just want to say that I'm so happy to be here. I actually attended one of these workshops at Duke University 2 years ago, and it was such an amazing opportunity to get face-to-face with some of these folks who run these grant programs and just use them as sounding boards for my idea at the time. So my project is distinct in two ways. First, in that it's not a research grant, and it's not a grant for adventure or exploration. It's a conservation grant, and that means something very specific within the Young Explorers Grant Program. And I think Tim Watkins and Angie will talk about that a little later. My grant's also different from the other two grantees in that it's not yet completed. It won't be done until March 2011, so I'm actually in between field seasons. So I have no results to present, and at first I thought that that was a disadvantage, but Tim Watkins aptly pointed out that it's actually an advantage to show you just how I conceived this project and envisioned it, developed it, and then where it's taking me now since I received the grant. So this was me in 2009. I was collecting data for my master's thesis. I was diving every day on the Belize Barrier Reef and quantifying coral cover. And looking back, I realized that the second most important thing I did that summer was just simply observe what was going on around me, in addition to being out there on the reef diving. And this was the first thing that caught my interest. And the reason why that is because I found out that this isn't a pleasure boat. It's actually a working fishing boat in Belize. This boat would come by every morning while we were getting in the water and drop off a canoe, a fisherman, and the fisherman just had a bag and a spear gun. And they were fishing for snapper and grouper, which is their top predators on the reef. White, fleshy meat, really delicious fish, and pretty much a staple of the Belizean diet. And I was really curious by these guys, and so this was the first guy I approached, and he was curious about me, so we kind of interacted, and you know, I looked in his boat and asked what he was catching, but instead of seeing all these snapper and grouper, he showed me 70 pounds of this fish. Does anyone know what this is? Any marine scientists? Yeah, this is a parrotfish. And so I was a little stunned at first because, number one, you don't go into any restaurants in Belize and see parrotfish on the menu, right? And it's not a cultural preference for these people. But number two, I was really shocked as a student of ecology. I knew that you know, these are often referred to as keystone species of the ecosystem, which simply means that they're arguably more important than any other fish out there, right? Without healthy populations of this type of fish, the whole ecosystem as we know it begins to shift. So this was pretty shocking, and the reason why they're so important is because unlike snapper and grouper, they're herbivores. So they eat the algae off the reef, and algae and corals compete for space on the reef. So if you don't have these fish grazing the algae off, then they overgrow the reef, and young coral recruits, you know, that's a baby coral, I guess you could say, just barely making its way in a bed of algae. And I took this photo when I was collecting data for my master's thesis. And the reason why this is so important in Belize especially is because in the past 10 years, Belize has seen a 3-fold decrease in coral cover. And that's pretty stunning. And my research showed that during that time, you also have a 3-fold increase in algae on the reef inside protected areas and outside of protected areas. So meaning that the marine protected areas in Belize weren't working. But you know, I was so shocked that they were catching parrotfish that I went to a local NGO and I asked, do you know what's happening? You know, this is what I saw on the reef. And they said, you know, actually we noticed this too about 4 years ago. We've been lobbying the government to get these parrotfish legally protected. And so actually while I was down there 2 summers ago, Belize became the first country in the world to legislate parrotfish protection. And that's a pretty big deal. Because it's a little different than the way we think of environmental policy making in the US. We usually protect things that are rare or endangered, right? And they're protecting this species because it's important. And so I went to World Wildlife Fund and I said, you know, this could have global implications for other countries that whose reefs are also in fragile state. And if this works, you know, this could be something that's adopted globally. And they said, you know, no one is assessing this. And you're the first person that has come to us. So I worked with World Wildlife Fund and some researchers at UNC, and they helped me put together a grant. So we got together and we thought about all the resources we needed. But in order to do that, I really had to think about what are the things that are going to affect the success of this conservation law, right? So I went into the local market. Instead of seeing the fish spread out like this, whole, they were actually laid out like that, little fillets. So actually what's happening is that the consumers don't even realize they're buying parrotfish. It's being sold as snapper and grouper, so we did some initial genetic testing, and we found out that almost 30% of this type of white fillet is parrotfish, even though it's being advertised as snapper and grouper. So I was interested in the ecology of it, right? If we protect these fish, will their populations recover on the reef so that the reef health can begin to improve? But then there's, the more I talked to fisheries managers and NGOs and also some of the local fishermen in the towns that we were doing research near, they started talking to me about things like social dimensions and management and governance, and does socioeconomic level or region impact compliance with these laws? So I wrote a grant taking all these things into consideration. So I wanted to survey the biophysical aspect, which is going back to the reef, then survey the social dimensions, which is surveying the local populations and seeing how these compliance factors are played out. And then the final aspect of the grant is to look at sharing this information with the fisheries managers in Belize and the Belizean government. So Belizean government and myself and Duke, we're really working closely here. And that's the importance of this conservation grant, and that it's applied to direct conservation purposes. And so National Geographic awarded me the grant back in April. I was a week before graduation. And the day before graduation, I flew down to Belize, and I was out on the reef, surveying the reef again. And so now this is where I'm at. I've got 2 more field seasons coming up. But the interesting about this is, I really want to emphasize something that John Francis was talking about, was going with your grant and letting it grow organically. And the more I talk to people about this really important conservation law in Belize, the more interested they are in the success of it, and whether this can be, using Belize as a testing ground. And so actually I've now used my funding at National Geographic to leverage $15,000 in addition to the $3,500 I got in my Young Explorers grant. And so this is really, this is the, where the Explorers grant can be so useful in using that money to get more funds. And we're using that $15,000 grant right now in conjunction with Duke University and this initiative that they started 2 years ago called Fisheries Forum. Fisheries Forum works with fisheries managers in the United States to get them talking about new science and leadership and new sorts of policy making. And so now we're using that $15,000 to bring that Fisheries Forum model internationally and bring it to Belize and really get Belizean policymakers talking about these things. Not advocating for one, for whether the law is great or whether it needs improvement, but letting them make the decision by providing the baseline information. So, so I just thought I could draw a couple points away from my grant experience, and they're points that I think are helpful for anyone writing a grant. I think the most important thing first is just to observe what's going on around you. When I was down in Belize, I was just really looking around and looking for areas where there was knowledge gaps, or areas where there needed to be some solutions. And so whatever your field is, just look around you and observe while you're developing your grant idea. And the next one is context. I was so wrapped up in the ecology of this law that it was only through talking to people and really looking at the whole context of things did I become involved now in collecting information on social dimensions and governance. And the next one I really want to emphasize is partnership. It's so important to partner. I was a master's student when I was writing this grant, and I could not have done it alone. And so World Wildlife Fund and UNC and Duke, they were so integral into the process. And now Fisheries Forum at Duke has become a huge partner in this project, and I'm working on it now through the Nicholas Institute at Duke. And the last part is just going with it, as John Francis said. Let this grant take you, and it's really taken me. And I want to use this last slide just to show you a map of the Pacific, and it's quite far from the Caribbean where I've done most of my research, but the folks in Samoa have actually contacted me. I'm going out there in November to talk to them about this parrotfish project and whether it's something that countries in the Pacific Small Island nations could use as a possible conservation strategy. And lastly, I'll be going to Australia in 2002 to talk about this project at a workshop, which is actually the International Coral Reef, 2012, an International Coral Reef Symposium. And so it can really take you great places, but using resources like National Geographic and using them as a sounding board for your ideas is so important as you develop them. If you have any questions, I'll be around all day. Feel free to just come up to me, and I'd love to talk to you more about it. I think my time is up. So thank you.